Welcome to your favorite YouTube channel, Cartoonist Kayfabe. My name is Ed Piscor.
I'm Jim Rugg.
We have Dr. Dandy Don Simpson in the house today, Jimmy. Give us a little bit of Don's bibliography and let's jump right into the conversation.
Yeah, man. Megaton Man, Border Worlds, Pictopia, Splitting Image, Savage Dragon versus Savage Megaton Man, 1963, Bizarre Heroes, and recently, X amount of comics, 1963, When Else Annual, Complete Megaton Man forthcoming from Fantagraphics and Victory Folks.
Amazing, man. Don, thanks for coming by. Pittsburgh.
Oh, it's out, man. It's out. It's not forthcoming. It is a reality, baby.
Talk about that Megaton Man omnibus is forthcoming. Thanks for joining us, sir.
Thanks for having me.
It's an early day here in the Berg in the 412 area code. So let's start things off and popping. Years ago, I always wanted to ask you this, Ben, and everybody knows the phenomenon. You receive the text message and you don't quite know how to you can't interpret tone over text. So tell us about those letters that were printed in 8-ball, that were hand lettered by Dan Clowes in 8-ball. What was the tone of those?
This video is brought to you by the books that we make. Street Angel Princess of Poverty is my next release from Image Comics. This will be in comic book shops late November. You need to pre-order that one now. It collects all the Street Angel comics that are not in Street Angel Deadliest Girl Alive. I am self-publishing and will be selling these on jimrugg.com in late October, October 26th. These go on sale. True Crime Funnies, 3 non-fiction stories, 1986 zine celebrating the biggest year in comics history, and BW, a collection of black and white explosion and self-published titles from the 80s, and Hulk Grand Design, my contribution to the Grand Design history, is basically sold out. So pick that one up if you haven't already added it and your store still has a copy. You want to grab that. Ed Piscor's Hip Hop Family Tree Omnibus, collecting all of the Hip Hop Family Tree, plus 140 extra pages, is now in finer bookstores and comic shops everywhere in one beautiful volume. Add that to your shelf before it's too late. X-Men Grand Design, the trilogy, collecting all 3 volumes of X-Men Grand Design, will be coming to comic shops in late November. Pre-order that one now. And finally, Ed Piscor's Red Room, Trigger Warnings, and the Antisocial Network are both available wherever you buy books or comics. And a 3rd volume, Crypto Killers, will be out in January. And now back to the video.
That's the story of my life, man, is nobody gets my tone. So, Dan loved them. Have you ever talked to Dan about it? I sent these, well, these were letters, these were, you wrote letters in the old days, you mailed it. And the postman delivered it, and they ran them in letters pages. And that's all we got now in comics is letter pages on the internet. Is just discussion or commentary.
Right.
Nobody does comics anymore. It's just all commentary. But I sent them to Dan, and I said, yeah, you're just jealous because you can't draw real superhero comics. And he loved it. He ran it, and there are people that to this day think that I was serious. But I kind of am. But he's got his New York Times bestseller, Monica, so he got his revenge. But
yeah, he's done.
I was just joshing him.
Don, what was that like in the 80s? Like, did you consider yourself part of that alternative comics group? I mean, it was much smaller back then, the indie black and white, self-publishers or small press at the time. Did you consider yourself a part of that alternative comics group?
We were all one big happy family, Jim. No, it was much smaller then, but it was very tribal. I mean, you got into the business and you were either an AV guy, like Jim Valentino. I met Jim Valentino and he was like attached to Dave Sim at Aardvark Vanheim, and I literally saw them walking around in Chicago at the must have been 85 convention. There was like, you were with this company, you were with this imprint, you were a Marvel person. The Marvel people were very aloof. They did not interact. The DC people were recruiting alternative people, so they were a lot friendlier. You guys seem to have broken all those barriers now. You do this alternative thing, you do your Marvel thing, and you somehow cracked that rock. But back then it was like you were with that company. I always identified. I mean, I just saw Jaime last weekend in Ann Arbor, and I said hello. And it's never been a mutual admiration society, but I always loved his stuff. I remember Love and Rockets #2, before they became critically acclaimed. And I was like, he's the only guy that I ever really envied because his figure drawing was so great, his design was so great, and he just seemed to be doing so many of the things that I wanted to be doing. Dan Close I always admired, and a lot of the Fantagraphics stuff that was. Uh, I'm blanking on the cat. Who's
Captain Jack,
no, no, no.
Omaha the
I'm
Cat
blanking.
Dancer.
No, no, no. Well, it was Fantagraphics. Uh, Woodring, Jim Woodring stuff. I mean, there was just great stuff. So I identified with those cartoonists. I identified with the crowd that was. Um, I think we were organized along the lines of work for hire more than, to my mind, more than superheroes. I mean, we were against. I grew up with here. All right, let's go back to the origins. The first professional cartoonist I met was Keith Pollard, who was penciling Spider-Man. He was doing breakdowns for Spider-Man. He was penciling the Fantastic Four. He was penciling Thor in the late 70s. And I was in high school. I'd been 15, 16. I had to be able to drive, so I was at least 16. And he lived about 40 minutes away from me in suburban Detroit. He lives in Southgate. So I got to visit him. Um, he was the first pro that I really met. I met Mike Gustovich years before that, and I met other people, but he was like at the top of the business. And so, the first thing I asked him was, you're penciling these stories. Do you ever put in your own characters? You must have your own characters. I think that's the coolest thing in the world would be to put your characters into a Marvel story. Because I would have been in middle school, high school. I would have been drawing the Meddler, and I would have been drawing this early version of the Slick, kind of this Ditko Roof Runner character I had, and I had other characters. Excuse me, and I mixed when I was sitting. I was supposed to be doing my math homework in school. I would be drawing on the back of the ditto sheets, and I would be drawing my characters with Spider-Man and the Vision and Captain America and so forth. So I'm asking this professional penciler, don't you want to put your characters in? He says, well, yeah, I have a closet full of my own characters, but I'm not going to just give them away to Marvel. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? And I didn't know what minimum wage was, let alone work for hire or intellectual property. There was none of this vocabulary at the time. So he's explaining, well, Siegel and Schuster got ripped off, and Steve Gerber got ripped off, and he also mentioned Rich Buckler. I don't think this is as well known, but Rich Buckler created Deathlock, and he had some kind of deal where he could keep the rights, but he somehow forfeited the rights because he wasn't making his deadlines or something, or he could have. Keith told me at the time that Buckler could have uh, done a paperback, like a prose paperback version of Deathlock, and he could have kept his rights or something, but he somehow lost it. So this is all new to me, like the creator ownership. The fact that, and it just blew my mind because I would see Keith's work, and he would pencil, and he would send it in to Marvel, and sometimes he'd get Joe Sinnott to ink it. It would turn out great. Keith said, he says, I turn in my stuff, and Joe Sinnott turns it into art. But other times he would send it in, and Dave Hunt would ink it, and it would look, or Jim Mooney would ink it, and it would be hacked out, rushed, whatever. And that just blew my mind that you could, because I'm spending hours penciling little figures and stuff. I wasn't even doing page layouts at that point. But the idea of sweating over a work of art, and then you send it into Marvel, the greatest company in the world, and they could just assign it to whoever they want. And if you create a character for them, they could just give it to somebody else to draw. And it's like, that just blew my mind. I'm 16 years old, and this is like, whoa, wait a minute. I put on the brakes. this is, I've been preparing myself for this career as a Marvel penciler, but it's like, whoa, wait a minute. I don't know about this. So a couple things emerged from that. I started teaching myself how to ink, and that led to, so Keith had me doing page layouts. He says, you got to start doing page layouts. You do like Steranko, do like a close up, do like a panoramic long shot, and do a two shot, mix it up and do designs, design your pages and so forth. So I started doing that. Next time I visited him, so I've got these silent pages, right? No words, and then he's saying, "Well, this is great, but you're not leaving enough room for the lettering. You need to leave a third of the top of the panel for the lettering," because they were working Marvel style. So I'm like, "Well, how in the world do you know how much space to leave?" He says, "Well, just put some blank balloons in it." I went home and I tried that, and I didn't like it. So then I'm thinking, well, I got to put something in. So I started writing. This is how I became an auteur, right? So I'm like, go from Marvel penciler to I'm inking and I'm lettering, and I might as well write something. I'm going to write my own dialogue. So that's how it all came about. It wasn't really an aversion to superheroes per se, the testosterone, the teen power fantasies is the Comics Journal used to like to say back in those days. It was
when
more an
teenagers used to
aversion.
read comics.
When teenagers, well, when middle-aged men recalled their teenage heartbreak or something. So that was really the impetus was, I just didn't want somebody in New York telling me what to do. I didn't want permission. I didn't want copyright. I didn't want my stuff turned over to somebody else to finish. And I came to, I had always been writing and drawing, since I was in grade school, but the auteur theory of comics, being a cartoonist, doing the whole thing, that came kind of in reaction to this revulsion that I felt toward the assembly line comic book industry. And it was very painful because that was what I was gearing up for. And I was studying Bern Hogarth's Dynamic Anatomy, and I was reading How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way that just came out around the same time. And I was fixed on a Marvel penciling career. But like I say, I didn't know anything. I didn't know about minimum wage or contracts or creative ownership. And this is way before toys and movie licensing. That wasn't really a consideration, The Image guys years later, they're all pissed off because they're turning, Rob Liefeld's character designs into toys and Rob's getting pennies or nothing, That was an issue in the 90s, but in the 70s, they had terrible Mego toys and a few stickers and a couple TV shows, but it wasn't the licensing and merchandising wasn't a consideration for cartoonists.
Did you put
in those things?
yeah? Did you put cohesive strips together before Megaton Man with lettering and all of the above, or is that your first sort of combination of all of those skills into one package?
Well, so we're talking a 5-year period, like around 1977. I graduated high school in 1980. So as I'm approaching graduation, a couple things are happening. I'm starting to do page layouts, and I'm starting to add words. And I did a 5-page John Bradford story in my senior year. John Bradford is a character from Bizarre Heroes. And he's the newspaper reporter. He's kind of Kolchak the Night Stalker. He's my younger, hipper version of Carl Kolchak. And I did a 5-page story. And that was basically the first full attempt at a penciled, ink, lettered, written. I was put writing last for some reason. But a comic book story. And it was pretty crude. I only have a terrible Xerox of it now. But And then after high school, I went to an art school in Detroit, Center for Creative Studies, which was frustrating because you couldn't really study cartooning. There was advertising, there was what they called visual communications or advertising design, and then there was fine art, which was all abstract. And there was some really ugly figure models to draw. So I only lasted a year at that, and then I decided I was just going to do my own thing. But the other thing that was happening was I was becoming increasingly influenced by Heavy Metal magazine and Undergrounds and some of the classic reprints like the Canon Wally Wood reprints. There's nothing like what there is today. There's all kinds of reprints. But Kitchen Sink, I was reading, Steve Canyon, and there was a Kurtzman reprint of some of his strips. So I was into like the art house comics. I was into art house movies. So I was seeing a lot of foreign films, Fellini and Godard and Truffaut, and Charlie Chaplin and Ernst Lubitsch and all the classic cinema, Orson Welles and Hitchcock and all that stuff. So I was into this arty thing, and I was living in Detroit. Now, in some alternate reality, I've always pictured that, if I lived in New Jersey or if I lived in Connecticut, I could have gotten into New York City. Maybe as a teenager, I could have been a Ramirez Raider or something. But I was in Detroit, so it's like that's like the middle of the country, and that's and I'm sending a few things through the mail. I got a rejection letter from Jim Shooter in 1981, something like that, which I took to heart. Like that was really devastating, a rejection letter. But now try getting a rejection letter out of anybody. He actually typed it, he actually whited it out, he actually corrected it. And that's now I would look at that and say, wow, Jim Shooter knows at least who I am. But I took it as like a real defeat, But I was doing, I did this really terrible comic strip on illustration board. And I was shooting for Heavy Metal, and it was about a tank and a naked lady.
It sounds like Heavy Metal.
But that was like, I thought this is really fine art. This is really, and the two characters in the tank, they're kind of the guys that end up in Boar Worlds. They're Frank and Diggs. There's these two guys roaming around in the tank, and they don't know where they are, and they're lost, and they don't know where they belong to, and there's a naked lady, and it made no sense. But that was my idea of real cutting edge fine art comics. And that got a couple rejection letters from John Workman at Heavy Metal. But that's where I was at. So I was doing that kind of thing. Now you mentioned Megaton Man, and I did a couple. That was actually kind of the most recent thing I created at the time that I did it. It wasn't like inventory from like, sometimes we go back to junior high school and we have characters from those days. A lot of that stuff ended up in Bizarre Heroes later. But Megaton Man was relatively recent. That was from fall of '82. I came up with that character.
Did you submit the entire package as a submission to the publishers, or did you just have, say, the first chapter?
No, I just had a character design and I had a concept. I mean, I'm
talking about when it was accepted by Kitchen Sink. What did they see?
Well, here's what happened. I mean, '82, I came up with the character design. I came up with the name, and I knew it had something to do with the Cold War and Marvel Comics, kind of the exaggerated superhero cliches and tropes. And I proceeded to do like I tried doing comic strips. I did like 3 or 4 comic strips that I was pitching to the alternate weekly kind of crowd. There was the Detroit Metro Times. And I actually did a couple comic strips for them, but not Megaton Man. They actually ran a couple of my film. I did a film satire strips. Very crude, excuse me, very crude stuff. A lot of zipatone, a lot of overworked stuff. But I did a number of false starts with Megaton Man. And then at some point, I in early '83, I started drawing this issue, and I did 5 pages, and I was making it up as I went along. I think the first thing I did was the Megaton Man meets the quartet, and Yarn Man says, "How do we know this is not a this is a crummy imposter?" And the fight breaks out. It's 5 pages. Excuse me, and that's all I had for quite a long time. And then I would come back to it, and I would think, all right, well, now he's got to have a secret identity. He's got to work at a newspaper. So I did a little bit more, and then it was very sporadic. I was excuse me, sorry for my cough. I that's my morning cough. Then I started to see longer and longer stretches of story, and I thought, well, maybe this is something. I was showing it to people, and I ended up doing a splash page in front of it. And long story short, it took me 13 months, and I had a final thing, and I took it to the Wayne State University copy shop in the basement. There was this old building there. Now there's a Barnes and Noble student bookstore there that doesn't sell books. It just sells hoodies. But I got photocopies, and I mailed it out to 15 different publishers, and I got 15 different rejection letters from Gary Groth, from Epic Illustrated, Mad Magazine, Eclipse. What was the? There was
Pacific.
Pacific Comics, and Pacific Comics and First Comics, and all kinds of places. AV. Dave Sim wrote back, and he said, "Yeah, sorry, we're already doing Normal Man. We already have enough parody, but this is really good." Joe Staten, who did E-Man, was a superhero parody. He was the art director at First Comics. And I think by that point, I'd already been picked up by Kitchen Sink. So he said, I'm getting back to you too late. This was an amazing period. If you think about it, people actually responded to your submissions. And I don't know when the last time Marvel has ever, responded in writing to anybody's submission. Those days have long passed. But I got a nice collection of letterheads of defunct companies, and people were generally encouraging. But then I got this blue envelope shoved under my door, and it had the Leslie Cabarga Kitchen Sink logo on the left side. And I was like, uh-oh, they're not mailing back the manila envelope with the samples. So I think, uh-oh, I got something here. So I open it up, and Dennis is like, yeah, this is fantastic. He was, excuse me, he was looking for, I think he was looking for Color Comics, because he had to publish the Color in Spirit, kind of against his will. I think he had a gun up against his head, because Eisner had this story called John Law that Eclipse had put out, and they had scored big sales, 75,000 sales with the Color Will Eisner story. And Spirit had always been in black and white in the 70s and 80s. So now Dennis had to be a color publisher. I don't think he really wanted to be. But then along comes this superhero parody, and Dennis figures, oh, that would make it good. Because otherwise, I mean, I'm just a beginner. That was my first comic book. I had no story arc in mind. I had I had no idea I could do it again, let alone bi-monthly or monthly or whatever he was talking about.
It was fun.
Ended up doing monthly.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun watching that issue progress, because your lettering chops, page after page after page, just you start to get way tighter. Like that's the part in issue 1 that is most clearly evident, where you're solidifying more and more and more into what your style becomes.
Yeah, that's and that's literally learning on the job, and nothing goes to waste, as in cartooning. If you got a finished page, put it in front of the camera, put it on the scanner, get it out there. I mean, you're not gonna rethink it. So, yeah, there was a lot of fits and starts and a lot of growth spurts. And I used to do my whys really funny, kind of, and I look at all these people like my lettering. I guess I had a certain sensibility to my lettering. It's kind of like Bill Griffith or something, but I've gotten a lot tighter. And that's always the goal is you just want to get good at it, whatever it is. It's not necessarily to make a masterpiece. I just want to get good at this. I want to get better at this.
One of the things,
What
Don,
is.
that I always respond to in your work is the level of craft. Whether it's inking, figure drawing, lettering, layout design, all of these things to me are exceptionally high level of craft. And it's something that I think comics have shifted in terms of how much they value craft. There are certainly successful cartoonists where I don't know that craft is a priority. But it seems like with your stuff, it was a priority. And, talking to you right now, I wonder, was anybody pushing you in that direction, or is that completely on you? Like, I guess, did you have a good editor? Did Dennis Kitchen give you any kind of help along the way, or was that all self-directed?
No, and by the way, I look at that old stuff and I'm not all that impressed with it. It's pretty crude. I mean, there was a lot of overworked stuff. I look at the 80s as pretty neurotic. You're trying to prove that you can do it. You're trying to prove that that comic book history. So that was the perfect thing about Megaton Man as a parody. I had not thought of myself as a humor cartoonist. I hadn't thought of myself as a satirist or doing comedy. I mean, I was real serious. I was like Steranko and Vern Hogarth and serious, heavy metal, serious stuff, right? Naked ladies, but serious. And but what was so great about the concept of Megaton Man was that I could make fun of all these different influences and pass it off as parody, right? So I could ink my eyeballs out like Neil Adams, or I could ink like Wally Wood, or I could ink like whoever. I could draw like Steranko, and I could really overindulge while I was trying to effectively incorporate all these influences into my own voice, and I was like the super adaptoid or something, I was trying to, excuse me, master all these different inking techniques, the sable brush, the crow quill pen, all those different tools. And later I was doing that with Border World. I was still doing that all through the 80s. I was still trying to blend Mobius, Jean Giraud with Wally Wood and Ralph McQuarrie and, all these different influences. So parody actually made it useful. You could exaggerate and you could do the hyped up anatomy, and it was funny. At the same time, I was trying to just get a handle on all this information and try to harmonize it, try to blend it. How do you if you're influenced by Crumb and John Romita, how do you blend those two things together? And 50 things, 50 different artists. So that's what I was trying to do. And at the same time, I was making reference to, I wanted to show people that I knew comics history, that I knew I knew the lore and the heritage, the rich heritage of cartooning, all that stuff. And that just lent itself perfectly to, or I should say, Megaton Man as a parody vehicle lent itself to that kind of exploration. So I could goof around with a lot of different styles. I could do Eisner for a sequence. I could do, Milo Manara, whatever. I could, I could be influenced by a lot of different things and pass it off as humor. But at the same time, I was learning. I was trying to see if I could do it But yeah, I guess it was all interdirected. Nobody was standing over me telling me, you've got to do, and especially at Kitchen Sink Press. You have to remember that Kitchen Sink was an underground publisher. And that meant if whatever came over the transom, that's what got published in Snarf number 3 or whatever, right? Like, there were no deadlines. What are you, a capitalist? What, I mean, these were a bunch of socialists in Milwaukee, and whatever came in, and Crumb would deliver a book to Last Gasp, and then he would deliver one to Rip Off Press, and then he would deliver one to Kitchen Sink. I don't know if he even told these guys that it was coming, but whatever came in, that's it. That's your deadline. It's finished. It's ready to go. We've got a whole issue. Let's send it to the printer. And that was Dennis's orientation. Now, he worked with Pete Poplaski, and Pete is a perfectionist, and he's the slowest guy in the world. And later he worked with Mark Schultz, who's another perfectionist, who's another slowest guy in the world. Dennis himself is the slowest artist in the world. I mean, those three would tie as, make a deadline, forget it. And Dave Schreiner was great to bounce ideas off of. But like I said, they got into this. I'm convinced they got into this because Megaton Man seemed like a viable color comic for the direct market. And they wanted a color comic book line to complement the Spirit so they could broker better contracts with the color printers. It was very steep price, it was expensive to put these things out in color. These had been black and white publishers, Eclipse and Fantagraphics and Kitchen Sink, and doing color was a riskier thing. So they were not like, I'm 23 years old. I'm this kid in Detroit. I wash dishes in a restaurant. I don't know my ass from a hole in the ground. And they're giving me a regular series, which is an incredible thing. Now, I'm a diamond in the rough, let's say, but I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I really don't know what I'm doing. And they were not hands-on. I asked them, like, well, what the hell do you want next issue? Like, what am I supposed to do with this thing? I don't have an idea. And they're like, well, you'll think of something. We believe in the artist. And that's all I would get from them. And I ended up living with them. I moved out to Wisconsin. I lived in the compound. And I got a little more immediate feedback, but they were still reluctant to really, they didn't want to direct me. This was creator-owned comics after all. They were used to dealing with Will Eisner. So they had done undergrounds, and then they did the classic reprints. And again, when you're dealing with classic reprints, you're dealing mostly with inventory material. Eisner had drawn thousands of pages of the Spirit, and he was doing new covers, and he was doing occasional blurbs and interviews and things, text pages and stuff like that. But it wasn't like Eisner was on a deadline. Like he had to draw, 30 pages next month, or that's the end of it. Here I was. I'm like, what am I going to do for the second issue? What am I going to do for the third issue? What am I going to do for the fourth issue? I'm out. What am I doing? And I had no idea. I had no. And here's the other thing. We live in an age now where you can go to the store, you can go on Amazon, you can buy like 100 issues of the Fantastic Four, and you can sit down and read them. I didn't have that. I had maybe a few issues here and there. I had a couple years runs of stuff. And then everything's in plastic bags, right? You'd have to untape it, and you'd have to read it. I had no idea how to construct a series. I had no conception of a story arc. I had no idea of, that was the amazing thing about reading J.K. Rowling, is that she had this whole thing planned out. Like, that's amazing to me. Like, you could do that.
It's one of the interesting things.
Flash forward.
I find in comics is in something that I think we've lost a lot of with so much comics education now. Like those expectations, they are you can find those if you want them, and I think a lot of young cartoonists do. And I think it's more interesting. You know, this might be old man bias or whatever, but it's interesting to me that time period where everybody that showed up kind of had to teach themselves how to do this, and so you got a whole bunch of different, very different voices compared to here's a couple of comics programs. This is how to make comics. I think it's something that's been lost as comics have been more accepted into.
What do you mean? What do you mean by expectations?
If you
Today.
if you go through a program now, many schools offer degrees in comics. You know, they're part of
Right.
art departments. Sometimes they're part of specialty schools that are just comics. And I think that there are, I hate to say maybe expectations the wrong word, but I think there is a process of like, if you graduate from this program, you can go to a New York publisher, and I don't mean Marvel, but I mean more of like a graphic novel kind of publisher, and you know to do your layouts, and you kind of know establishing shots and talking heads, and it's somewhat formulaic. Whereas you go to the early days of the direct market, and it's suddenly it's like there are open shelves in these comic book stores. We need to fill these shelves, and you have a bunch of people who want to make comics like you're describing yourself, but you don't have formal education in it, so you're learning as you go. And what you learn or the way you learn those lessons is very different than, say, how Dan Clowes learned, or the Hernandez
Oh yeah.
brothers,
Well,
or you know, any number of guys who came in the 80s and essentially were teaching themselves how to make comics and were given that auteur freedom of the independent press. And I think that's exciting. I think that's something that has changed. You know, good or bad, I think it's very different today than it was in the 80s, whenever it was suddenly like a bunch of new people have come onto the scene and don't really have rules. You know, they're just
well,
learning.
Jim, this is before understanding comics,
Right.
before McCloud. I mean, I can remember this had to be a Chicago Comic Con, and we're up in Larry Marder's room, and there's me and Steve Bissett, and Scott McCloud has Xerox copies of his rough layouts for understanding comics, and he's reading it to us, and it's like I'm like I learned things from like reading film theory books. I read Eisenstein, and I looked at movies frame at a time in moviolas and viewers, and I went to and I that's how you had to learn it on the street, right? And
Right.
here's Scott reading about comics, and I said my quip was I said, yeah, I'm gonna write a history of comics. The first line is gonna be Egypt Schmeegypt, and set fell out. Larry Marder, they're all laughing, but like, oh yeah, it all goes back to the ancient hieroglyphics and all this crap. So forget all this stuff. I've had people quote understanding comics to me. I'm listed in the acknowledgments. I don't know why. I contributed nothing, obviously, but people quote. Some of my students in my workshops, they said, you're not following Scott McCloud. I said, well, I was before that. I'm before Alan Moore too, but I kind of learned. You learned it on the street, and it was hard-won knowledge. But somebody sent me a textbook a few weeks ago. I'm in a Bloomsbury textbook on comics, and they had to ask my permission to use a panel or something from Megaton Man. And yeah, they're using terminology that I don't even recognize. They're called there's words for things. I went to college later, but I don't know all these terms. So I'm probably spewing misinformation about how to create comics now because I don't.
Yeah, right. You're teaching people the wrong way to make comics.
I'm uneducated untutored in this form of narrative cartooning now.
Don, I want to skip ahead a little bit to as you're wrapping up Megaton Man, you start doing Border Worlds as backup and then Border Worlds as a series. And I kind of want to look at that point in your career from, say, the late 80s into the early 90s, because you do like Border Worlds, you do some of the Eros titles like Wendy Whitebread, Forbidden Frankenstein, King Kong with Fantagraphics Monsters, imprint. You're doing a lot of these different books in a short window there that are very different from one another. What's driving that? Is that something that is motivated by capital? Is it opportunities? Like what's pushing you in these various directions at that point?
Mostly it's a series of failures and unfortunate events. The first thing that happened was, well, first of all, Marvel threatened to sue us, which was kind of a pro forma letter. They were upset that we were selling this pinback button that said, "I eat X-Men for breakfast." They considered using the word X-Men to be Marvel merch, so they were upset about that. And you can still buy them from Dennis Kitchen on his website. he, in fact, when I met Kevin Eastman, he was wearing one of these things. But so we were threatened with legal action because we were because all of my parodies, I was repeatedly using the quartet, and I was making fun of Spider-Man too often or something, and they felt that we were trading on their trademarks. Like somebody would confuse a 60-cent Marvel comic with a $2 kitchen sink comic. But anyway, so that was the first kind of, the sky is falling kind of moment. So I started doing Border Worlds as a backup, and I was kind of thinking of that as a lifeboat. Border Worlds goes back to middle school. It was this idea that had evolved slowly over time, and so I always wanted to do a science fiction series, and I was influenced by Star Wars and Close Encounters, all those 70s movies that came out, Alien, and then Aliens. And I think Jenny had originally been the naked lady from the Tank story or something. So anyway, I started doing the backup, and then we had announced. So I had these other ideas. I had, Megaton Man was just a one shot, and I had other ideas that I wanted to pursue. I didn't want to be typecast. I had other ideas. I'd always had other ideas that I planned to pursue, more serious, dramatic, Hamlet ideas, and this was one of them. And I started the backup feature just to test the waters. And at the same time, I was kind of running out of Megaton Man ideas because that made less, that I had to do less Megaton Man per issue, so that helped. And then we announced that the series would only go to 12 issues. There was in those days there was the Amazing Heroes preview issue, and we announced that it would end with 12. And then one day, Dennis called us into the office. I was living out there in Wisconsin. Called me and Dave and Pete into the office and said that the color line was coming to an end because the Spirit was losing money in color. It had started out great, but the sales had declined.
It only lasted a couple issues in color, really. Like it was like
Spirit.
Yeah.
Spirit,
it went to black and white pretty quick.
It went for maybe 2 years.
Okay.
Because there was a preview in Spirit number 8. There was a color preview of Megaton Man in Spirit number 8, so it went at least, I want to say, about 20 issues. So something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, there was another title called Death Rattle, which was in color. That was losing money. And that maybe had more to do, not so much with sales, but with the fact that Eisner had a certain royalty. And Death Rattle had, to attract industry talent, Dennis had to pay a page rate. I wasn't making peanuts on Megaton Man, but that was kind of holding up the whole thing. Megaton Man profits were kind of subsidizing the whole line. So anyway, he says we're going to bring the color line to an end. And do you want to do the last 3 issues in black and white, or do you want to keep doing Megaton Man in black and white? And I said, well, why don't we just finish it with number 10? Because I was working on maybe 7 or 8 at the time. I said, let's end it. We'll wrap it up with 10, and that'll be easy because I haven't drawn anything yet. I'll just condense what I have, the ideas that I have. Probably didn't have, and you're probably not missing anything from that contraction. But so we would, and then we'll do Border Worlds as a black and white series. That's perfect because it's kind of I envisioned it as a more moody kind of dark alien kind of thing. Sigourney Weaver in the darkness in a murky battle, murky starship and so forth. And then all of a sudden, Kitchen Sink had a science fiction line because they'd gone from color. The Spirit was now in black and white. Border Worlds, Alien Fire was in black and white. That was Eric Vincent and Anthony Smith. I can't remember exactly when Cadillac or Xenozoic Tales, Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, Mark Schultz. I remember when that artwork came in into the offices. They were all very excited. I think they previewed it in Death Rattle. So now we're doing these dark, depressing, or at least sober, serious science fiction stories. And I think that was a big change for my following, whatever that was, to go from bright, happy superhero satire to suddenly there's this introspective, meandering science fiction storyline about a lady on a space station somewhere and intrigue and colonial rebellion and stuff. But I was trying to think more in terms of a story arc. We weren't at the point yet of thinking of collections and graphic novels per se, although Eisner had coined the phrase graphic novel. But we were still doing serialized, make it up as you go along kind of storylines, at least I was. But I was trying to think in terms of longer story arcs. And then when that came to an end, because the industry went through one of its booms and busts, I have a theory that the black and white boom of the 1980s was actually fueled by Frank Miller and The Dark Knight, because when the Rolling Stone issue came out, it was like it was the cat's pajamas. I mean, it was like heroin shot into this system of comics, and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was this black and white comic book that had been inspired basically by Frank Miller's Ronin. And so suddenly, this is my theory, that everybody thought, well, gee, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are big. Everything's going to be a black and white comic book now. So suddenly, black and white comic books were like the biggest, it was like cryptocurrency or something. And so, like, the Hamsters are selling 100,000 and Troll Lords are selling 70,000, and everybody's doing great with black and white comic books. And there's this black and white boom, and it's all fueled by this stupid Rolling Stone article, which was an inside job, Warner Communications pumping up Frank Miller. And Border Worlds benefited from that initially. We had pretty good sales. And so my first issue came out, and it sold, over 10,000. But then everybody was glutted with black and white comics. And so then you have a bust, right? Everybody's over gorging on black and white comics. All these retailers have these unsold black and white comics, and some good things came out of it. Ron Lim and X Mutants, and lots of things that were happening. But like everything else, fans and retailers just beat it to death, and we make some money, but then we pay the price. So there's a total collapse, and I had to bring Border Worlds to an end. And luckily, Mike Gold at DC is looking for people to draw for Wasteland. So for me, it was like one disaster after another. I was just jumping to the next lifeboat. Color comics went away at the Kitchen Sink, and then black and white comics impossible. And then I'm freelancing this insane this insane thing. John Ostrander is writing these scripts based on Del Close stories, and I barely knew who Del Close was. I'd met John, so now I'm suddenly freelancing, and I'm getting beginner page rates at DC Comics, which is still more money than I was ever making in my life at Kitchen Sink. You know, owning this thing, owning these two properties. So it just went from there to there, and then somehow Kevin Eastman always liked my stuff. As I said, I met him. He was wearing a button, and so he had me do a couple Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle stories for a couple collections, and the thing was, I never got the Turtles. You know, you grow up. It's easy if you grow up reading comics and you get the concept and you can generate ideas, but I never got it. So I ended up doing like my own faux turtle stories, and he loved them, and so I did that. So I ended up doing a few jobs for Archie Turtles and for Mirage, and I did a few things for DC. I did a Dan Mishkin, Gary Cohn story of the Flash villains, the Rogues Gallery, and I did Bill Loeb's story for the Flash. And so I was doing this freelance thing, and it was a learning experience for sure. It's one of those things where I look back now and I think, gosh, I should have made more of the opportunity, but I was mostly angry about not being able to do Border Worlds. And I was not used to illustrating other people's ideas. I was used to illustrating my own ideas. I could have enthusiasm for the ideas that came out of my own head, but suddenly I was getting these scripts faxed to me, and they just said, you know, panel 1 close up, panel 2 long shot, and I had no method. I had no way to break down a script. And I didn't have the good sense to call up John Ostrander and say, what the hell are you doing in this issue? But it was a learning experience. And I look back on it now, and I was really amazed to be cutting my teeth on, with stuff that was actually published. You don't get that kind of opportunity now.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Don, you know what, man? You have such a broad career, and it's clear we're gonna have to do a part 2. For sure, because there's still so much stuff to get into, man. The Eros, the early 1963 stuff. But with the last 15 minutes that we have here, let's hit on the new Fantagraphics book that's out. We did a review of the PDF that you slid us some months back. We described it as a Gordian knot of comics influence because of things like where you have the quartet that's a Fantastic Four parody. You have Mystery Incorporated from 1963. That's a Fantastic Four parody, but you can't use those characters in your comics, so you have to do a parody of a parody and have them interact with your parody characters. Describe what this comic is to people.
Well, first of all, I got to thank you guys for like reviving my career to a great extent. You start talking about Splitting Image and the Savage Dragon team up. I didn't even think you guys liked me. I'm like, what are these videos? They're doing these reaction videos to these old comic books. And so suddenly people are like, hey, have you seen this thing? So thank you for that. But well, I don't know where to begin. I've told this story several times. I mean, Bissett, I was involved in the original 63 as a letterer. I tell a whole story in the back of the book. I'll skip that part. But I just I think of my work now as being more writerly. I start at the typewriter. I start at the keyboard, and I plan things out, and I try to plot things out, and I write scripts first. And I change a great deal when I get to the drawing board, but it's much easier for me now in my old age, rather than to draw dozens of pages and then have to scrap half of them and retool them and so forth. It's a lot easier to sit down and work out my raw ideas in a script. And I'm more confident in my use of language, college will do that to you. So I write scripts and then I tear those apart. It's a lot less painful to cut something you've written rather than to have, you know, finished artwork that you have to kind of you know, that there's no use for. So I approach things as a writer now, but X amount of comics I reverted to form. I just drew this. I had this idea of a cover, and I penciled it. It says, "Fuck Al, here's the 1963 annual," and I posted it. And I posted it on Facebook. And again, Steve Bissett went nuts. He's loved it, and he shared it. So in the micro world of Facebook, suddenly it went semi-viral. And people are like, "Oh my God, this is fantastic. You're going to finish this 1963 annual." And I would explain, well, not really. It's a satire about the fact that it was never finished. But people are like, "Oh, is this going to be real? Is this going to, can I get a copy tomorrow?" You know, everything's got to be immediate. And I said, "No, it's going to take me a year." So again, I do 5 pages, just like I did Megaton Man #1. And it's like, well, do I have anything here? I don't know. You know, and I'm making up characters, and I don't know where. Like I just, you know, I drew this lobster-looking guy who's kind of N-Man, and he's a Cyclops. And I literally did not think about it until I got to the page, and it's like, oh, he's Cyclopster. Like, I don't know where these things come from, and I don't think it's just the mojo wire is connected or something. And I thought it's Cyclopster in time, you know, and Psychic Squid. I have no idea where that just fell out of the sky. And Limberlass. If you look at the original pencil of that cover, there's just placeholders. Because in fact, I hadn't even read the whole 63 series because I got fired. So I wasn't even familiar with the characters. So I wasn't trying to do an archaeological dig.
Right.
I wasn't trying to reconstruct what Alan might have done, or, you know, what Jim Lee might have drawn or anything. I have no idea because I don't know any more than the public knows, because I was out of it. I was halfway through. I was out of the series. And I never owned it. I never had any participation. So I'm just making it up as I go along. And I have 5 pages, and then I do 10 more pages. And then I start to plot it out, and then it becomes what it is. So it's just, and then I look at the calendar and I realize, oh, it's been 30 years. I'll put it out in 2023. And Gary Groth wanted to do it, so here you have it.
So fantastic, man.
That's short enough for you?
And humbling enough to know that 1963 is 30 years ago.
Yeah,
Jesus.
really.
Yeah, man. Well, you guys came in, you know, see, this is the interesting thing about your channel and your whole orientation is you came in at probably the most overheated time.
Sure. Old
timers like us were like, what is all this tinfoil logo stuff and plastic bags? We thought it was an abomination. We thought it was the most crass disco era last globe moment in comics. We thought this is just horrible. And yet you guys came into it and you fell in love with the art form in spite of or because of all the glitz and the wizard and all that crap. To us old timers, we were like, oh, this is blasphemy.
So much of those comics, you know, the McFarlanes and the Liefelds and stuff, the attraction was that it was drawable to a third grader or something like that. Like you saw it and you saw the rough edges, and if this is the popular comics of the day and these are the guys drawing it, like that's more achievable than some of the levels of craft that you would see with, you know, true maestros and stuff. So that was kind of like the influence that's what we witnessed as we were growing up. Plus they would draw more full figures, and that's the era where as a kid I'm copying so much more out of comics, and so like to get more bang for your buck was like the more full figures per issue than anything else. So it would just always happen to be the same guys.
What's interesting about you guys is you went back and looked at the legacy. You know, you went back to look at from, and you went back to look at Kirby, and you went back to look at things that had preceded, and you dug into like historians, like art historians. You dug into the past
It
and the
it
traditions.
it only took a year or two of reading that stuff to realize there's nothing there, and we like comics, so you have to dig deeper at that
And you
point.
had some great stores in Pittsburgh. Where did you go? Did you guys go to like Bem and Hides?
Never been. Never been. Ides comes a little later. It was Phantom of the Attic was my first, but I discovered direct market shops late. We were just talking about it earlier, man. I was 11 or 12 by the time I even knew. And like it was like my parents ripped that page out of the yellow pages because they know what they would have been in store for if I would have found that. But it was all Kmart and the I would describe our generation as the last vestige of the the newsstand comic reader. We're the very very tail end of that. I never bought any of that Rob and Todd stuff, at a comic shop. It was just
And yet the Image era did not permanently damage you guys. You just somehow.
well, we are getting a class action lawsuit together because of where our skills may have been without such influence. But Dawn, we want to let everybody know about that Phantom book. It's got a big title. What is it, Jimmy?
It is X amount of comics, 1963. When else annual?
That's so good. So Jimmy also alluded to the Megaton Man Omnibus. Dawn, what do you have on the horizon, and where can people follow you online to keep appraised of what you have in store?
Well, I'm mostly on Facebook. This is my. I don't know how well you can see this. This is the penciled cover to the omnibus. It's actually going to move across the screen like that. I got to finish that, get that off. I did a lot of scanning last year. So I scanned everything. We've got 2 volumes planned. I don't think Gary Groth wants to lose too much money at once, so he's kind of spacing these things out. So next year, hopefully, we'll have volume 1, which will be pretty much the kitchen sink years, followed by volume 2. I'm calling it the Megaton Man universe, the complete Megaton Man universe. So volume 2 would be Bizarre Heroes,
That's fantastic.
which was my self-published thing from the 90s.
I want to talk to you a lot about that next time we get you on the hook, man. Because that was on my pull list. Whenever I discovered comic shops, Bizarre Heroes was coming out. I still have my trade from that I got signed by you in like 1992 or 93 at Pittsburgh Comic Con, and then I started picking it up with issue 5 on the pull list at Phantom.
Remember your early samples were all Image.
Oh,
You were
yeah.
trying to break into Image.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we got more to talk about, and then I'm got more where that came from. I'm doing new stuff, new Megaton Man stuff.
That's cool, man. When's the omnibus? Is it scheduled?
It's not scheduled. It's the designer Doug Erb is working on Stan Mac's collection right now. So hopefully um, he will be starting on the design before the end of the year. It'll probably come out middle of the next year. Probably too late for San Diego, just like X amount of comics, but that's the way it goes.
I mean, what's 50 copies sold at San Diego? You know what I mean? Like that's not what. It doesn't matter as much. People are there to go go to Hall H and see what the new movie is.
Well, thanks for the plug, guys. Thanks for the promotion. I appreciate it.
Yeah, social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, any of that stuff.
Just mostly Facebook, and I have some blogs. You can just Google me. You'll find all kind of
Kayfabers,
stuff.
like, follow, subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the
And,
bell so that we
thanks
can
a lot
notify you
again.
when new videos are available. Kayfabe-tober is still upon us. These are your prompts for your drawings this season. Make sure you add us. Make sure you tag us in those images. Make sure we see those images, and we are going to share and retweet as many of these as possible. The videos are brought to you in part by the patrons. The King Kayfabers on the Patreon get all the videos before anybody else, thus mitigating the kayfabe effect. We are a daily YouTube channel with more than 1,500 videos at your disposal. We might have talked about some of your favorites. So hit the search field in the front page of the Cartoonist Kayfabe channel. Search for your favorite comics. Check out those episodes. But if we didn't cover your favorite comics, you have to let us know what those comics are so that we can push those titles a little bit higher up on our to-read pile. Ultimately, The videos are brought to you by the books that we make. Jim Rugg and myself, we are working and functioning cartoonists. This is a healthy blend of our bibliography right now, but we're making stuff all the time. And that time is now. The Hip Hop Family Tree Omnibus is out in stores. Make sure you scoop this sucker up, man. It's the best book I ever made, collecting all 4 volumes of Hip Hop Family Tree inside of one handy gold foil hardcover with a bunch of new material. So even if you got those original volumes, there's plenty enough here to justify your purchase. X-Men Grand Design Trilogy trade paperback is coming to you in November, collecting all of my X-Men Grand Design works, and some of those volumes are out of print as we speak. I'm serializing a daily strip that is going to be coming out January 1st, 2024. It's called Switchblade Shorties, but if you are on my Patreon, you're going to get early access to those strips. Thank you guys so much for joining the Patreon. We received a whole bunch of feedback in the past week or two. I put out new strips every Tuesday for the early adopters to enjoy. Red Room has been the focus for the past couple of years. There are 2 trade paperbacks out there, The Antisocial Network and Trigger Warnings. These are self-contained. These each contain 4 self-contained stories, so it doesn't matter which one you read first. But there's going to be a 3rd volume called Crypto Killers coming out in January that I want to let you guys know about. Man, save $20 from your Christmas and Hanukkah loot and scoop up the Red Room Crypto Killers trade paperback. Jimmy, what do you got on the horizon?
Street Angel, Princess of Poverty is my next book coming out from Image Comics. It'll be out in November. You need to pre-order it now at your local comic shop or wherever you buy books or comics. It collects all the Street Angel comics that are not in Deadliest Girl Alive, which is also from Image Comics. They'll make a really nice set on your shelf together, and there's no overlap between the 2 books, so pick them both up. You'll have all the Street Angel comics. Hulk Grand Design. This is my contribution to the Grand Design Marvel project, and I believe it's out of print. So if you haven't added it to your shelf already, these copies are disappearing fast. Pick one up while you still can, because once it's out of print, no guarantee that it is going to be reprinted anytime soon. And finally, I've been self-publishing lately. True Crime Funnies, 3 nonfiction stories in there, including 2 wrestling yarns, the 1986 zine celebrating the greatest year in comics history, and the BW zine celebrating the black and white explosion in self-publishing comics and oddities from the 80s and 90s that I love so much. Those are all going to be available on my website, jimrugg.com, October 26th. I do have big quantities, but that is like my holiday fall sale. So if you want to add any of these books to your collection, that is the place to get them, October 26th, jimrugg.com.
It's imperative that you guys kayfabe affect the books, because that keeps the lights on in the studios. But there are some ways to directly support the Cartoonist Kayfabe channel. Jimmy, let the people know.
Subscribe to the Cartoonist Kayfabe e-newsletter at the links below this video. You can also pick up Cartoonist Kayfabe t-shirts, merchandise, mugs, hats, stickers, and more from our spread shop. That link is also under this video in the show notes.
There you have it. Several ways to keep these videos coming to you on a regular basis. Without further ado, Jimmy, please give the people their marching orders, and we will be on our way.
Read more comics.